everybody. Are you guys ready to get started? Thanks so much for being here. There's a bunch of people in the room with us today and a lot of people on WebEx, so thanks so much to all of you. If you're on WebEx, just remember to stay muted if you can, and if you have questions or comments for our speaker at any time, you can enter them into the Chat with Everyone box, and I will read it out for our speaker at the end of the presentation or anytime. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Amy Trowbridge, who is an assistant professor of pediatrics and attending physician on the palliative care team. She's also the director of the Palliative Care Training Center at the University of Washington. She completed pediatrics residency and chief residency here at UW and Seattle Children's, and then a hospice and palliative care medicine fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She returned to us at Seattle Children's to join our faculty in 2016. Dr. Trowbridge is distinguished faculty for Vital Talk, a national organization devoted to improving communication for patients with serious illness, and she's excited to be launching Peds Talk, the University of Washington Department of Pediatrics local Vital Talk program. Welcome. We're so happy to have you today. Welcome, Dr. Trowbridge.
Thanks so much, Suzanne, and thanks all of you for coming. It's really an honor to be here and to get to present, and I'm oddly really nervous, but sometimes if I just say that aloud, that helps get that out of the way. So I'm going to talk today about a framework for culturally responsive, trauma-informed communication, specifically around information and prognosis sharing. Before I do that, I want to take just a quick minute to tell you a little bit about how I got here and how I settled on this topic. So as Suzanne mentioned in my introduction, I've been working and teaching with Vital Talk for my entire career. And as many of you may know, we're launching an institutional Vital Talk program here over the next 5 years called Peds Talk. For those who are not familiar with Vital Talk, it's a nonprofit national organization that aims to really change the culture of medicine, specifically for patients with serious illness, through evidence-based communication training. My work with Vital Talk has been truly transformative in how I communicate with patients and their families and how I teach other people. And so much of what I have learned as a Vital Talk teacher and educator has helped me in my own personal journey of becoming a more culturally responsive communicator. And yet, over the years, I found that the Vital Talk frameworks, while powerful in their simplicity and applicability, sometimes don't go far enough to explicitly call out some of the nuances that are really needed to truly serve our patients and families with backgrounds and lived experiences that are really different than the dominant medical culture. So with that, I've spent the last several years working to create adaptations that bring into light some of these really critical nuances. And that work of adapting this incredible foundation of work is what I'm going to present today. So this is our agenda for today. As we move through this agenda, I'm going to do something really weird for Grand Rounds and ask for audience participation. I truly cannot bear the thought of teaching communication without some level of engagement. So to get us ready for that, I'm going to ask you all to take your phones out and use the QR code. This should work if you're online as well. And this is just our practiced question. If tomato is a fruit, does that make ketchup a jam? I need to start doing some research on the answers to this questions. I asked this question in New York, and I got a lot more "don't be ridiculouses" than I am. And Seattle's a really open-minded group, I think. We're open-minded here. Awesome. So it looks as though that technology is working, which is great news for me at least, and hopefully for all of you. So now I'm going to just start talking about what is the problem, what is the thing we're trying to address with this framework. So the literature suggests that when clinicians think about sharing medical information with their patients and families, particularly difficult news, bad news, serious news, They describe it as being difficult for a number of different reasons. One, they don't have enough time to do it well. Two, they haven't really been trained to do it well, right? It's not a part of our culture to be teaching communication. They're worried about cross-cultural communication, and really importantly and poignantly, they don't want to take away hope. This is not why we went into medicine, to dash patient and families' hopes for cure, for improvement, for a long, healthy life. That makes sense. At the same time, we hear from clinicians over and over again that they feel really worried on behalf of their patients and their families when they fear that those families just aren't understanding how serious the situation is. This is balanced with data from parents that summarize, that suggest that most parents, although importantly not all parents, really want to hear honest information about their child's condition and what the future might hold for their child. But they also want their team to hope alongside of them. And parents often report that doctors seem to only want to talk about the negative. And this quote is from a parent who was participating in a qualitative study about prognostic communication after severe traumatic brain injury, and I think it really gets this problem really succinctly. This parent says, I think clinicians' concern is that there's some kind of denial going on. They can't see how a full acceptance of how sick they are can exist at the same time as hope. People understand it when they say it's bad. You don't have to beat them over the head. And so what we're really trying to do here is find that sweet spot between telling the truth in ways that patients and families desire without veering into this space of information toxicity, where we're giving more information despite cues that that information isn't needed or isn't helpful in that moment. And in order to guide us on this quest to find that sweet spot between those two places, I turn to three foundational fields. First, the growing body of literature on communication science, of which many people in this audience are contributors to. One major limitation of this literature is similar to a lot of research in academic medicine, is regarding whose voice predominates and whose voice is represented. When it comes to communication science literature and pediatric palliative care, that voice is most predominantly white mothers. And it's unclear how that data applies to non-dominant cultures. And so with that in mind, I also am going to lean on core tenets from the fields of cultural responsiveness and trauma-informed care, two fields that, while certainly not perfect and all-encompassing, tend to come up from the community rather than down from above. And when I think about cultural responsiveness and trauma-informed care, I think specifically of the work of Melanie Turvalon and Jan Murray Garcia and the trauma-informed care literature, primarily from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And after sort of reviewing a lot of this literature, talking to a lot of experts in this field, I've sort of settled on four key tenets from these fields that really apply to communication in a medical setting. So the first one is self-awareness and curiosity. And this is really the foundation for good communication, kind of the foundation for everything, being self-aware and coming from a place of curiosity. The second is this concept of affirmation. This is really the idea of radically affirming the lived experience of our patients and our families. And statements of affirmation not only help families feel seen and heard in a healthcare setting that oftentimes doesn't see them or hear them, they also can be really powerful ways to decrease our own implicit bias. Saying this aloud helps us get out of our own biases. The third tenet is this concept of voice and choice. We must be active in breaking down the inherent power imbalances that exist between clinicians and patients and families in the healthcare setting by really creating space and elevating the patient and family voice in the healthcare setting. And then finally, accountability. All the best communication in the world is if we're not doing something about what we learn and following up our communication with action that is centered on the needs of the patient and family. I'm going to return to these four tenets throughout my talk today and talk about how I think they apply. So this is the communication framework for delivering serious news that I've developed with colleagues, and we're going to walk through it kind of step by step together today. The blue boxes in this framework are specific communication tools that you can use, and the yellow boxes are corresponding questions for us to ask ourselves to help us take a pause and think about where we are in the conversation and how we can serve the patients and families in front of us. And I found that the easiest way to teach this is to start actually by walking through what I think is the most common way that this conversation unfolds, this sort of default or standard pathway toward the bottom. And just as a note, this pathway is essentially what has been taught in communication skills training for the last 20 years. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly through it, but I want to make sure we all have some foundation of what that is. So the first step here is starting by asking what the patient or family already knows, to find out for yourself if they're missing key information that you can help fill in for them. And this step is critically important and one that often gets skipped. We oftentimes walk into the room, we're in a rush, and we just start sharing, right? So the step of actually taking a pause and asking, what have you heard? Tell me your perspective on what's been going on with your child. That allows you to start from where the patient or family is at rather than where you think they might be at. This helps you to be self-aware by not assuming you know what they need to hear. It affirms the importance of their perspective, and it elevates their voice in promoting a collaborative conversation rather than a unidirectional conversation. So assuming you find out that they are missing some key piece of information, before you fill that gap in, the next step is asking permission to share more. Would it be okay if I share what I know? Asking permission explicitly offers control back to the patient or family in a setting where they oftentimes have very little control. This step also helps you slow down and remain patient or family centered in these conversations. Asking permission is a powerful way to mitigate power imbalances in a healthcare setting. So then, assuming the patient or family member gives you permission to share what you know or what you have heard, you can then move on to sharing information. And many of you have heard of this communication skill of a headline. This is the sort of couple of sentence key thing that you want the patient or family to remember or take away from your conversation. And I often teach that a good headline contains two really equally important parts. The first is a brief summary of the medical facts. That's the information, the update, what's changed. And then the second part is what it means for the patient's future. And it's that second part that I think as clinicians we often miss because it's the harder part to say, right? We're comfortable in our jargon, we're comfortable in the information, but actually translating that into a meaning is a harder thing for us to do. One of my interventions, and I think many of my colleagues' intervention on the palliative care team, is in a family meeting. In our pre-meeting before that meeting, I might ask the whole group, what is it that we're really worried about for this patient or this family? And the answer to that question is the thing that we should be saying as our meaning, right? That's the radical transparency. When families are open to hearing medical information, hearing our updates, that's what we should be sharing. So we're going to watch how this sort of common scenario plays out through a case. And apologies to my oncology friends in the audience. I hope I got the details right enough. This is an oncology case we're going to use. So we're going to use the case of Quinn. Quinn is a 4-year-old with relapsed rhabdomyosarcoma. She's got new pain in her legs, prompting some scans that showed tumor growth and additional new mets to her lungs. Treatment options at this point include an early phase clinical trial or some palliative chemotherapy, but the team really does not believe that a cure is possible. Quinn is an only child cared for by her father, Felipe, who's a single parent. Felipe heard this news during a family meeting last week with Quinn's oncologist and also Arica, the oncology social worker who was there in the visit. Quinn's back in clinic today, and Arica is planning to check in with her father, Felipe. The clinic nurse stops Arica in the hallway and says, I'm worried Felipe doesn't get it. The clinic nurse is really hoping Arica can help make sure Felipe understands that there is no cure for Quinn's cancer. So we're going to watch this conversation between Arica and Felipe, and then we're going to return back to that framework afterward and ask ourselves those two yellow questions. Was Felipe missing key information, and was now the right time to share it with him? So take some mental notes or write a couple things down as you watch, because I'm going to quiz you afterward.
Hi, Felipe. It's so good to see you.
Thanks. It's nice to see you too.
I'm glad we're getting this chance to check in today.
Yep.
Yeah. How are you holding up?
I'm hanging in there, I guess.
I can only imagine how difficult the past few weeks have been.
Yeah, it's
you.
definitely been a lot.
Yeah. And how's Quinn doing?
Oh, she's doing a lot better, thank goodness. The pain medicine they gave her is helping. She's back to being her feisty self.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. I can only imagine how hard it was when your baby was hurting.
It was tough. Now I'm just trying to understand more about what we're going to do next. So, what can you tell me?
Yeah. Felipe, I know how committed you are to Quinn's care, and a lot was shared last week. I would be happy to talk with you more about it.
Thanks.
About what we talked about last week.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
So, before we start, the meeting was very intense and a lot of information was shared. And it'll be helpful for me to understand kind of what your takeaways were.
Yeah, okay. I'm just a little lost in it all. I think they said the cancer was smaller in some areas, but maybe bigger in others. And then they were trying to decide what to do next. It seems like they can't decide between more chemo or to try a clinical trial. I really don't know.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Felipe. Anybody who was in your circumstances would be overwhelmed.
Thanks.
So, is it okay for me to share what I know about Quinn's cancer and her treatment?
Yes, please. I really want to hear what you know.
So, first, I wish I had better news. Quinn's scans show that the cancer is spreading despite the treatment. And the team said that although there are more treatments, they're worried that we can no longer cure Quinn's cancer.
What? No, that just can't be right. Why would they? There's always been something else.
I know.
Morning, Grace.
She's feeling better. She's, like I said, she's back to being her feisty self.
I know. I can only imagine, Felipe, how hard this is to hear. It's so clear that both of you have worked so hard over this past year.
Exactly. We've been at this for almost a year.
And you've done everything we've asked of you. Everything.
I just cannot believe this. She's my everything. I just can't lose her.
Okay. Just a moment of grace. These are clearly simulated scenarios, but can bring up pretty real emotion, pretty intense cases that we're talking about today. So let's look back at our framework and think about the answers to these questions in yellow. And I'm going to ask you all to get your phones out again and think about this question. In that scenario, was Felipe missing key information about Quinn's prognosis? Okay. Looks like we're coming to a pretty close consensus that he was likely missing some key information. And what I noticed in that video is when Arika asked what his takeaways were from the meeting, he shared, yeah, I'm just a little bit lost in it all. So to me, that was a cue that, yeah, he was missing some key information. So Arika appropriately moved on and asked permission. Would it be okay if I share more about what I know? So grab your phones again and take a vote. Was now the right time to share more information with Felipe about Quinn's prognosis? I love this small contingent of people who are like, I'm not positive. Maybe you wanted a little bit more information. I love that intuition. I think most people thought, yeah, it probably was the right time. Doesn't mean it was easy. Doesn't mean he was begging for the information or that it was going to be easy to say, but yeah, he was asking for information. So when Arika asked permission, he said something like, yeah, I'd really like to hear what you know. He was giving cues that it was right to give more information. So Arika moved on to sharing the information in the form of a headline. Great work, crew. You passed your first quiz. So let's think about what Arika's headline was. As I said before, a really good headline includes the key information in a sentence or two and the meaning. So I would categorize the information here as the scans show that Quinn's cancer is spreading despite the treatment. And there are more treatments. But the meaning here is that we're really worried we can no longer cure her cancer. The hardest part to say. So now that we've sort of watched that kind of common scenario, we're going to go back and consider some of the ways in which that typical path in this framework breaks down by examining a few common missteps that I know all of us in this room, definitely myself included, have made in communication. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to watch another demo. It's the same case with Arika and Felipe talking about Quinn. But this time you'll see a different version of Felipe. Unfortunately, Arika is going to proceed with the same sort of approach as before. The video is going to pause a couple of times and have you reflect on some of the key portions of our framework. And I want you in particular to pay attention to how Felipe is reacting differently than the first version of Felipe you saw. And then what happens when Arika does not adjust her approach to communication.
Hi, Felipe. It's good to see you. I'm glad we have this opportunity to check in today.
Thanks. It's nice to see you too.
How are you holding up?
Oh, I'm hanging in there.
How's Quinn holding up?
She's good. Pain meds are working. She's feeling better.
That's good. I can't imagine what it was like for you to see that your baby was hurting.
Yeah, but we're just focusing on the positive right now. I'm really looking forward to getting her onto the next treatment. We're going to beat this thing. We just got to get moving. So, can you tell me about the next steps?
Sure, but first, can we take a step back?
Okay.
So the meeting last week was very intense. There was a lot of information shared. And it would be helpful for me to understand what your takeaways were from that meeting.
Yeah, okay. So the damn cancer has spread again. The doctors, they don't think they can cure it. But you know, Quinn, she's a fighter. And we have God on our side fighting with us, so she'll pull through.
Right. Okay, can I share with you what I know about Quinn's cancer treatment?
Okay.
So, as you know, from her last scan, the cancer is spreading even on treatment. You know, it's a very aggressive type of cancer. And while there may be some additional treatments, they aren't aimed at curing her.
Yeah. I've heard all that. Trust me, I've heard it. I know that's what you all think.
Sorry, Felipe, you know, it's just important to be honest, that we're honest and that we're on the same page.
On the same page? I don't think so. So you all think that you can't cure her. Fine, I'll just take her someplace else.
Okay, so let's return to our frameworks. Grab your phones again, and let's think about, in this version, was Felipe missing key information about Quinn's prognosis? Okay. My app that's like letting me switch back and forth just disappeared. Now I've got it. Okay, great. So general consensus, probably not. Although some people are like, I don't know, maybe he was. So I love that. What I heard is after Arica asked his Felipe's takeaways from the meeting, Felipe said the cancer is spread. The doctors, they don't think they can cure it. And then he added, but you know Quinn, she's a fighter. And that can certainly confuse some folks, that fighter language. Does that mean that they get it or not? So I'm gonna pause here and ask you a different kind of engagement question. These are gonna be free text responses. And I want y'all to think about, for a minute, what factors, besides what a medical team shares, inform a parent's sense of prognosis? What else besides what we tell them informs what they think about what's going on with their child? A lot of comments about faith. I saw in their past experiences, their love and hope for their kid. Appropriate denial, so interesting. Oh my gosh, they're coming in fast. What a great group. Thank you all for participating. What they hope and want to be true, how their child looks, past experiences, right? We've all had those experiences where families say, yeah, you've told me my kid is going to die 10 times already, and they always come back. How the team reacts, what they see in their child's energy, their stamina, their personal factors. Yeah, there's some part of who their child is, that fighter mentality that's different. I love this, incredible. Thank you all so much for your contributions, and they're gonna keep coming in, which is so cool. That was a really cool, very rapid research study. There also have been real actual IRB approved research studies on this question with parents themselves. So These are oncology researchers out of Washington University, St. Louis, distributed a survey to parents of advanced cancer and asked this question: how informative have each of the following been in your current understanding of your child's likelihood of cure? And interestingly, these are parents who had a pretty decent match of prognosis with their clinicians. And what they found was that most parents found information from the medical team to be really important, but not a single parent listed that as the only thing that was important. What this study shows to me is that parents are taking what they hear from their care team and incorporating all those factors that you all listed, how their child looks, what their support systems are saying, and their own complex processing of information to create their own estimates of their child's prognosis. Something that is actually missing from this list that was missing in the way the researchers asked this question is that thing that many of you brought up, which is prior experience as well. And so when we think about these factors as a whole, really only the first one is likely to be influenced by sharing information again. And so we're really looking for those situations where the patient or family member is clearly missing medical information from the team. Stated another way, in a similar study of adult patients in the ICU and their surrogates, less than 2% of surrogates said that their beliefs about their loved one's prognosis came exclusively from what the team told them. Everyone is incorporating some aspect of their deeply held personal beliefs, culture, etc., into their perspective. This is a normal, healthy thing that we all do when we are facing a difficult situation. And so the point here is to be careful not to confuse different beliefs or different perspectives for an information gap, a missing piece of information that we haven't provided clearly yet. Tony Bach, one of the founders of Vital Talk, has this quote that I think summarizes this really well. We clinicians tend to think of information as a kind of fertilizer. If we just sprinkle it on there, awareness will blossom. If we just tell them again, if we just have one more family meeting, then they'll get it and they'll be ready to transition to comfort care, whatever it is. There's also really important emerging data that our own implicit biases impact who we believe has an information gap. And another study out of the oncology literature showed that oncologists were much more likely to believe that white parents have a good comprehension of the medical information than Black parents. This is complex research, and there certainly is research that suggests that there are disparities in how we deliver prognostic communication across races. However, that doesn't explain, that alone does not explain this difference in who we think, quote unquote, gets it. So with this in mind, if we really are taking the time to ask what a patient or family has heard, what their perspective is, and we find out that they're not missing key information, what can we do instead? I offer you today 2 tried and true communication skills, 2 of my absolute favorites. They're all my little babies, but these 2 are my favorites. Reflection statements and support statements. And so for those of you who know the nurse mnemonic, a support statement is the S in nurse. And so when Felipe said, the cancer is spread, when Felipe shared his takeaways from the meeting, the cancer is spread, the doctors don't think they can cure it, but Quinn, she's a fighter. A reflection statement might sound something like, it sounds like you heard the information pretty clearly last week, and you have an understanding of how serious things are. And a strong support statement might sound like, I'm hearing it's really important that we as your team continue to focus on supporting Quinn in whatever ways we can. Reflection and support statements can do a real lot of important work here. It is, unfortunately, a common experience of individuals, particularly from minoritized communities, to have their experiences or their expertise discounted or dismissed in a healthcare setting. reflecting back what you are hearing they are saying is a verbal affirmation. It allows you to actively counteract that experience. By stating clearly, you see them, you recognize their expertise, and you believe them. And you're committed to supporting them moving forward, to partnering with them in their care and their child's care. Okay, we're gonna watch one more version here of the conversation between Felipe and Arica. And again, this time poor Arica will not adjust her approach. So pay attention, again, to how Felipe is different this time. What are the cues you're getting from Felipe that might make you pause and think about a different approach to information sharing? And then watch what happens when Arica does not adjust her approach.
Hi, Felipe. It's good to see you. I'm glad that we're able to check in today.
Yeah, nice to see you too.
How are you holding up?
I'm hanging in there, I guess.
Yeah. I can only imagine how difficult these past few weeks have been.
Yeah, it's been a lot, but just taking it one day at a time. We just have to move forward. On to the next, I guess.
Yeah, of course, of course. So, Felipe, I'm wondering, the meeting last week was really intense, and there was a lot of information shared. I'm wondering if we could take a step back and if you would be willing to share with me what your takeaways from that meeting were.
Well, with those meetings, it's just a lot of doctor talk. I honestly think I kind of checked out. We always end up doing the same thing. They give me a ton of information. I try to follow them along. Eventually, they figure out what treatment they want to do next. I don't remember much from last week, except they're trying to figure out what the next treatment is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Felipe, I'm wondering, would it be okay with you if I shared what I'm worried about after sitting in on that meeting?
What you're worried about? I don't know. Look, I just need to keep things positive. That's how we're going to get through this.
Yeah, as much as I like to keep things positive, and trust me, I'm all for that, I also think it's important to balance that out with what we know about Quinn's cancer. So, as you know, her scans show that her cancer is worse. It's a very aggressive type of cancer, and we have treatments, but we don't believe that the treatments will cure her.
Oh my God. I cannot be hearing this right now. Not today. This can't be happening.
Felipe, this is a very aggressive cancer.
All right. I know.
I cannot have this conversation right now. Not today. I have too much going on.
It's a little bit painful to watch, huh? For those of you who know Arica well, you know that she would never commit this level of information toxicity in real life. All right, let's return to our framework one more time and those questions that we're going to ask ourselves. So, in this version, was Felipe missing key information about Quinn's prognosis? Just loving this unsure group, right? You're like, I want a little bit more data, which is such a good intuition, right? Sometimes that assessing what a patient or family already knows is work that I'm doing over the course. That might be the only work I do in a visit, right? That can take some time to sort out. Looks like most folks thought, yeah, he probably was missing some information. That's what I thought too. When Arica asked for his takeaways from the meeting, he shared, honestly, those meetings are a lot of doctor talk. I don't really remember much. Certainly sounds like he's missing the key takeaway there, right? So Arica appropriately moved on to asking permission. Get out your phones again. Was now the right time to share more information with Felipe. Seemed pretty clear. It didn't go that well, right? Yeah. Probably not. When Arica asked Felipe permission to share more, he said, I don't know. I need to keep things positive. That's how we're going to get through this. How many of you have heard patients or families say something like this? Most of you. Yeah. So let's pause. Now let's think about this situation we are in. We have a pretty good sense that there's something really important about a child's prognosis that this parent doesn't know. And yet, the parent has said, I'm not sure if I want to hear it. So this is another free text one. Take a minute and think about, how does it feel to know a patient or a parent is missing key information and not share it? Your responses will be anonymous. Unnerving. Ooh, stressful. Bad. Anxiety provoking. Yeah, frustrating. Thanks. Yeah. Neglectful, like we are failing at our job. Oh, interesting. Cognitive dissonance. It feels scary. It feels frustrating, but often that's what it is. Like, I am not doing a good job. I'm worried, right? I'm worried about my patients. How are my patients and their families? How are they going to make good decisions? How are they going to cope? How are they going to move forward if they don't have a sense of what's going on? Wow, I feel like a secret holder. I feel like I'm neglecting my job. How are we going to get them the information? They're saying no, and yet I know this is really important, that they really need it. Such powerful thoughts. Thanks, y'all, for participating. So, for all of these reasons, our tendency as clinicians is always going to be to share, right? Because it feels not good to not share this really important information when we have it. It takes a tremendous amount of self-awareness to recognize when we might need to stop, even for a minute. Ultimately, though, I think this pause, this self-awareness is really key to promoting a patient or a parent's voice and choice, and helps us be accountable to patients or their parents who need a different approach. When people put up signals of overt or even subtle hesitation, the risk of re-traumatization through information toxicity is high. We may still eventually share that information, but we need to do some other work first. And the good news is the same skills can work here too. These communication skills of reflecting back what you're hearing and strong statements of support. So in that last video, when asked permission, Felipe said, I don't know. I really need to keep things positive. That's how we're going to get through this. A reflection statement might sound something like, gosh, it sounds like right now, hearing all of the information isn't what's most important to you. You need to focus on the positive. A radical statement of support might sound like, as your team, we want to honor what you need in this moment. These simple skills of reflection and support can be powerful invitations for them to open up more, share more about what is behind their hesitation. Some people are tempted to ask about it. Can you tell me a little bit about why you don't want to hear? And that might be a skill you could use too, although I would caution you about starting with that one, because that can be pretty subtly subversive. It can feel like an argument. So starting back with a "I hear you and I'm going to support you" can be pretty powerful here. So there are many reasons why a parent or a family member might not want to hear difficult news. And so for the last little part of this talk, we're going to explore some of them. And you all have proven to be a very brilliant audience, so I'm going to start with you here. Why might a parent not be open to hearing new information, particularly if they think it's bad? Yeah, maybe they're overwhelmed. They have some high emotion around it, lots of overwhelm. Maybe they need somebody there. They need their support person. Maybe they're in denial. Maybe that denial is a form of coping. They're not ready for their hope to go away. Maybe they have some prior trauma with information toxicity. It makes it real. It can be soul-crushing. It's unfathomable. Maybe they've got other stuff going on. Another emotional event, or just like another logistical event. We say this all the time in the hospital, right? We don't get to hit pause when our kids are sick. They're using suppression to cope. This is not denial. I love that. Thank you. Maybe they already know. What a good call out. Maybe they didn't share that when we asked their perspective, but maybe they do know and they just aren't ready to talk about it with us. They're exhaustive. It feels repetitive. They can't fall apart right now when they have other children to take care of. Wow. They're self-aware of their needs and limits. This is really powerful stuff. Thank you all for sharing some of those thoughts. And I think this lines up a lot with some of the thoughts I have around this. I find it kind of helpful to categorize, to put things into themes. So I'm going to offer sort of 4 general themes of why, in my experience, we see families kind of putting the brakes up. So the first is the circumstances, and a number of you mentioned this. Parents often know what works for them in terms of hearing new information. Maybe they need a support person there. They need to have more time available, for example. That makes sense, right? The second is this concept of coping or emotional regulation or emotional overload. Limiting the type or amount of information received can be a healthy reaction to really difficult situations. And many parents report that this is one way that helps them get through difficult times. I think Felipe's line earlier was potentially an example of this. I just can't take bad news right now. A couple of you mentioned this concept of trust. Parents often need to develop a sense of trust with a clinician before they're ready to hear new information from the team, particularly if they are in a healthcare setting that has not given them much of a reason to trust us. And then the last theme I think about is limited relevance. So there are some families whose values around care and around decision-making are such that really more information truly may not be helpful to them and would not influence their decisions that they're going to make for their child either way. I'll call this out. These cases can be really tricky for clinicians because oftentimes these families' values feel like they're in conflict with our own values or what we think we would choose if we were in their situation. If a parent sets a boundary about information sharing and we're able to do some diagnosis here around they're not the right time, their version of this, in order to be accountable, we have to take action based on what we learned. And that action is going to look different depending on what we have learned. So going back to those 4 categories, if the issues are circumstantial, can we reschedule or otherwise accommodate what they're asking for us? This is pretty easy most of the time, right? For families who decline to hear information for a coping reason or because they're in a particularly high emotional state right now, they're not emotionally ready to hear this, can we slow down? Can we show explicit empathy? Sometimes that's actually enough, right? Just saying, gosh, I can only imagine what it must feel like to be facing news like this, to be thinking about talking about news like this. right? Sometimes that's enough, and you might actually hear more and be able to move forward with the conversation. Other times we might need to reschedule. For families for whom we haven't earned their trust, can we reflect that back explicitly and supportively? Something like, I'm hearing you really like to receive information from people on the team that you know well. Or, I'm hearing we haven't earned your trust. Then can we rely on our team? Who are our folks? It's not always the doctors or the nurse practitioners. Sometimes it's our cultural navigators, our social workers, our bedside nurses. Can we rely on our big interprofessional team to help figure out how to support a family through these hard times? And for families who hold values such that this information really isn't all that relevant, again, can we reflect back what we're hearing to affirm their perspective, their experience, and their needs? I think for these families in particular, documenting this conversation for others on the care team can be really important and powerful. I worry a lot about the ongoing harm we're causing. We're making these problems worse when we continue to try to engage these families over and over again, hoping that something will change. So can we lift that burden from some of our teammates by reflecting that, by documenting that we have had this conversation and this is where our family's at? So that's it. Y'all moved through the framework beautifully. I'm going to close with just a couple of resources for those of you who want to learn and practice more. So that first we talked about a little bit. Peds Talk is coming to the department. All of these incredible folks have signed up to be Peds Talk educators to bring some of this work out to the whole department. So reach out to these people and ask them to teach you. And they are excited to start to think about how to bring more of this work in more intimate settings than this one out. Second, if you haven't heard of Courageous Parents Network, this is an incredible resource developed by a bereaved parent, Blythe Lord, who actually gave grand rounds here a couple of years ago, and it's on the website archived if you want to watch her grand rounds. Courageous Parents Network was actually initially founded for parents, but has become a really important hub for clinicians who care for kids with serious illness. And in the last year or two, they released a series of videos on unconscious bias in medicine, highlighting perspectives of parents and also clinicians and how bias shows up in care. The videos are incredibly powerful. They tend to be just like 5-minute clips from parents and clinicians, including Arica Patnode. So I encourage you to check those videos out sometime to learn more about how this shows up, particularly in serious illness. And then the last resource for those who are really looking to get deep into this content and immerse themselves in work like this is the graduate certificate program in palliative care at the University of Washington, of which many folks at Seattle Children's are alumni of. I'd be happy to talk to you all if that's something that you are interested in pursuing. And gratitude to Katie Kenningham, an alumni of our residency and fellowship, for this quote she shared about her experience with the graduate certificate program. So I'll close with some gratitude to all of the amazing collaborators and advisors, in particular Arica Patnode, who you got to see a lot of today. I promise she would never commit that level of information toxicity that we asked her to portray. And to one of my main mentors, Caroline Hurd, who helped with this work. To everybody on our advisory committee for this work, and then to my husband, Julian, who truly moved mountains to actually be here in person, and my 2 kids, Harrison and June. Thanks you all so much.
We have just a couple of minutes if anyone in our audience has a question or comment for our speaker, and then I'll also be monitoring the chat online. But thank you so much, Dr. Trowbridge. That was really, really, really helpful for me. Thanks.
That was such a wonderful talk, Amy. I just appreciate it so much. As you were talking, I was wondering if maybe there's a similar phenomenon. I'm curious if you think there can be such a thing as support toxicity or offer of support toxicity, that there's some families who we say, can we do anything to support you? Can we get you anything? And they just keep telling us no, and we keep asking them anyway, and we keep making more offers. And I'm just curious what you think about that.
Fascinating, Jen. We did have a patient once who we had to write a list of things that they could answer to that question because they were like, the nurses keep asking what they can do for me, and I can't think of anything. I think that what that brings up for me is the idea of inauthentic support statements, right? So how do you use a support statement that feels authentic, knowing that you're going off service in a week, or that you can't guarantee what the night team is going to say or do, or what the next person on the team is going to say or do. So thinking about what are ways that you can really tailor that support statement to, that it feels authentic to you and true to you. I promise I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to be honest with you. And that I have a really good team that's going to try their very best to do that as well. Yeah.
Amy, thank you so much. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how what you went through with us. It seems like you took an existing body of work and then you really adapted some of that with your own. It's real scholarship of how you changed this to this existing body of work to help families in a situation where that stuff wasn't working. And I was like, how do you get yourself into a place where you can think about these new ideas? Do you mind sharing a little bit about how you find the time and space to do that?
What a great question. I mean, it's kind of the same as like I think everybody who does research, they find the things that bug them in the clinical setting, right? And so I think this is no different than that. You start to see in clinical settings like really well-meaning, well-intentioned clinicians clearly trying to do right by their patients. And then on the back end, when we're coming in as palliative care clinicians, hearing about the harms that are happening from the way we communicate, hearing about harms that we have committed ourselves to, not that palliative care doesn't do this. We definitely screw this up all the time as well. And so I think that's the first thing, I guess, Shug, is like picking the thing that bugs you and sticking with it. And then, I mean, to be totally transparent, like having some grant funding to get to do stuff that's not traditional research. And the Cambia Health Foundation has been a huge supporter of work like this over the last many years and has supported some of my FTE to be able to pull together this incredible group of an advisory committee and to spend a lot of time thinking about these topics and trying stuff out and throwing things out there and seeing how it fits and paying families to give us feedback on what we're developing too. I have a pretty strong belief that that when we get input from families, we should be paying them, especially families of color. So I don't know if that helps, but. Yeah.
Amy, that was fantastic. I wanted to just see if you could elaborate on that difficult scenario that you mentioned of limited relevance, where information isn't what's important to the family. That flies in the face, as you intuited, of us as clinicians wanting to achieve informed decision-making with a parent. So how do we say more about how we can navigate that apparent conflict?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I mean, I don't know, except for I think a lot of it is coming back to exploring what are those families' values, what is important to them, and then that helps us figure out, is there really truly medical information that they need to hear because of a value that they're sharing with us that is different? And can we say, I'm hearing X, Y, or Z is really, really important to you. I'm hearing that, not being in the ICU at your child's end of life is really important to you. Would it be okay if I share a little bit about that, right? So then maybe tailoring some of the information about what you're learning from their values, but going back to reflecting, supporting, and asking more about their values, who they are, what makes them tick, what's important to them, seems really important and really, truly like taking a break from the conversations. because oftentimes those things, it's not like those 4 categories are mutually exclusive, right? They all get mixed in together, and oftentimes in those situations, trust has been broken down, emotions are high, and we are really committing further harm by continuing to push the issue.
Really powerful. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Trowbridge, for this incredible work. And we'll see everybody next week. Thank you.